So if you had, the next generation now, so your kids, let's say, or
Hmm.
somebody at the Gurdwara, and they've heard of you, like, oh wow, you're a visual artist, and they came to you and they were like, okay, so if I wanted to look into this type of thing, what is the advice you give to the next generation about how to just explore this, this kind of avenue, so they have an idea of the type of things you do, or I mean, you can talk about the arts in general if that's easier, or as a visual artist.
My advice, and I guess I'm actually lecturing a module called professional practice at the moment, and it's all about actually how do we make a career out of what we love to do. And I
Wow.
guess
Okay.
the in terms of photography, and it's just know your research, but actually a lot of it is to do with confidence as well. And
Mm.
you could be the hardest working grafting um, photographer or visual artist, but actually, if you're not making the right connections or you're not networking with the right people, you're not getting your work seen by the kind of people that can give you the commissions, then you're not going to get anywhere in such a way. So you kind of have to
Mm.
have a very online presence now anyway, but being able to
Mm.
speak to people. And it's something I've reflected on in the last few years because it's something I've got better at in my 30s. And I think
Yeah.
actually since I've had my kids, that confidence has just kind of blossomed in me where I've gone, okay, I'm really going to go for it. This is what I want to do.
Mm.
Um, and I think I guess it comes back to that thing. My mom and dad, they own a shop. They're shopkeepers. My dad was a taxi driver and bus driver. They never taught me
Mm.
how to network or how to
No,
schmooze.
obviously
It's
not.
not. They
Schmoozing, that's the word, yeah.
they know how
No, it's true.
to.
It isn't a common thing that's taught to you. You just tend to pick it
No.
up over time the more and more you do things.
Or the type of language you use with people, or how
Yeah.
to
Mm.
talk to people in the kind of work atmosphere. That's something you kind of learn or I've learned myself kind of growing up. But my parents probably haven't, well, they didn't because they knew how to work hard and they gave me that hard work ethic,
The graft.
that
Mm.
grafting I got from them. The other elements of kind of fitting into society here in the art
Mm.
world and learning actually how do I navigate this art world, I've had to pick up myself. So that's the kind of thing I'd teach my children is that, okay, if you want to get into that world, then
Mm.
this is how you write an email. This is how you network with the right people. You've got to have the work to back it up. You've got to be,
Absolutely.
you
Mm.
have to be able to hone
The
your
product, the
craft.
product, as it were, like what you produce has to be
Yeah.
amazing. But you're saying the other side of that is, like you said, the visibility and
Visibility of
getting in,
who
getting the
sees it.
opportunities. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And getting your work there because
Mm.
yeah, and it's being able to speak that language and know, and I'm sure it's maybe similar in your professions in terms of being able to
Yeah.
talk a language that's
People are receptive to, and they will
yeah.
then provide you the opportunity. So for me, the very
There's a
simplest
sort
of,
of work talk that people tend to put on, and we all know how to flick it on and off whenever we need to. It's just something you pick up though. No one ever tells you to go to work and just be your normal subdued self. You have to kind of just get out there and put yourself into uncomfortable situations and kind of understand how to navigate it better.
Precisely. And I think that's actually a lot of risk taking as a photographer or a
mm,
visual artist, that actually you have to put yourself out there a lot and be ready for a lot of rejection. That, you're
mm,
not going to get everything, and that's fine, but that can be really character building. Yeah. So for my kids, and actually my nephew is super creative and
mm,
he's only 8 years old,
mm.
or 9, I think. But he loves drawing and
That's great.
illustrating,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
he's so good in that, that actually, I'd completely support him and tell him how, well, if that's a career for you, this is the
This
avenue
is
you
what you
should think
do.
of. Yeah, there's always a little bit of a framework, but actually that's going to chop and change anyway, to a
Mm.
certain degree. But being able to have that confidence to go and put your work in front of people is key, I think.
It's
Mm.
quite scary as well, isn't it? Because you're putting yourself in front of people just to be judged. And a
Mm.
lot of us don't like being
Mm.
judged, especially if you feel
Mm.
like your work, if you think your work isn't adequate, then it's very difficult to go into a situation where you're going to be openly judged and accept what may be or what comes of it.
And that's a really good point, actually, because it's really important to have a support network that you
Yeah.
can actually go to and go, okay, honestly, what do you think of this work?
Sounding board.
And a
Okay.
sounding board that you can go, right, um, maybe should I tweak this? And over the last few years through Workshop Grow, which is an online school, so to speak, by Natasha
Mhm.
Caruana, a really amazing artist. She's run it. I've gained this really brilliant support network, and through other places too, where actually they're my sounding board, that I can show them some of my work and get some feedback. And I think you need that. And a lot of the time, there's this perception that you work alone and you're kind of the lone wolf and all your achievements are your own, but it's not. You need a really strong and really good support network to help build you up, and also to get you wherever you want to go. Like, it just doesn't happen on its own. And I think, especially when you feel like you're being judged, or you're putting yourself in that position, being able to speak to people that you trust, that gives you a little bit of comfort in practice as well. That if you're going to show certain things, etc.
Yeah, I agree. Well, on the topic of networking, how did you jump into the Commonwealth Games and get that opportunity? Because you obviously did some work with them closely. Tell us a bit more about that.
That's a good one, actually, as a example of being able to network. So Multi-Story are an arts organisation based in Sandwell. And I did a project with them in 2018, 2019 called Mitti Di Khushbu. And that was basically based on my family. So I shot portraits of all my family members. I focused more on the elder generation, because at the time I was pregnant. I was about 8 months pregnant, so I couldn't photograph all my extended family. So I photographed all of them. I collected their stories. So I got them all to write the life story and collected old photographs, which I then exhibited in 2019 at the Blast Photography Festival with Multi-Story. And it's from there that really my relationship with Multi-Story grew. And then they helped me network with the Commonwealth Games, because I said from the outset to Multi-Story, I want to make work for the Commonwealth Games, because previously I've made work on women's football, everyday Olympian, because of my own passion for sports, but also showcasing normal everyday people, grassroots sports, that idea of community. So Emma and Nicola from Grain Projects, and Emma from Multi-Story, they, because of their standing as the biggest arts organisations, visual arts, photography wise organisations in the Birmingham, Sandwell area, they were having conversations with the lead producers at the Commonwealth Games, and they, just because they're so nice, and they knew of my work, and and I'd worked with them, and I told them I want to make this project happen. They kept dropping my name to them, and then I managed to get meetings with the producers at the Commonwealth Games. I put proposals forward. I got the Arts Council funding, and the Commonwealth Games team, the Cultural Festival, they really believed in the work that I wanted to produce. They really had a lot of faith in me that I'd be able to do this. And thankfully, I can say that the faith's been put in a good place, because I've made the work. Now we're working on getting the exhibitions ready. So
nice.
Oh wow, so it's all ready to go.
Yeah. So the community exhibitions, there's not 8 out. There's 9 outdoor exhibitions in total. So there's 8 going out to community spaces. So where I've basically been taking the photographs. So all of that I've shot and edited, and they'll be up from end of March, April. And then the main exhibition, which will be a large scale kind of billboard size outdoor exhibition at Sandor Valley, will be around the time of the games. So at the moment, that one I'm still working on producing. It's all been shot, just need to edit it. So so I've been photographing a lot of grassroots clubs over the last year.
And you wouldn't have known, taking that opportunity about 2-3 years ago that it would lead to something like this. So I guess having the approach of networking and just being outright forward with the end goal. I don't want to say end game, because he says that all the time. With the end goal in mind, it makes it sort of easier for you to sort of put that out to other people and say, if you have a connection with this is what I would like to do anyway. And naturally that's obviously panned out for you.
I think from 2018, 2019, when I made Mitti Di Khushbu, it's building that connection, that relationship. But then 2020, I made the Birmingham lockdown stories, and with each project, I was just able to reinforce my skill level and develop also my socially engaged practice of me working with different communities. And I think that all helped. It just helped my portfolio and going. So when I approached Commonwealth Games and was able to show us, like, look, all this work I have produced. And they could go,
behind
yeah,
me.
we can imagine and envisage, right, what you're going to do. Because the Mitti the Khushbu work was, again, it was an outdoor exhibition. So it was in a Lightwoods Park in Bearwood. So that they could go, okay, she's got those skills, that experience. So yeah, definitely.
And the inspirations of that Mitti di Khushbu, so translated, guys, that's kind of the smell of the soil. Is that the kind of, that's the literal
smell of the
translation
land, smell of the
of
soil.
the land? Yeah. What was the inspiration behind that? What is it? Clearly, well, this is what I'm presuming, but you can tell us otherwise. So when you have a project, do you have an idea of this is the story I want to tell, and then you go and capture, let's say, the talent, the models or whatever it might be? How do you, or is it, do you find people and then you're like, well, what's your story? Like, how do you find the stories? That's what I'm really trying to ask. And what do you get from the stories, like personally, whether in that case is your family, but people you don't know as well? What is it doing for you?
I guess with every project I do, there's always the overarching theme or the concept I've got in mind. So with Mitti the Khushbu, that was all about documenting my family's migration from Punjab to the UK and Birmingham. That was really clear for me. And what I wanted to create with that was a legacy, essentially, because at the time I'd just I was a new mom. I had my daughter and I was pregnant with my son, and my baby passed away. So my baby passed away in April 2018 from cancer. And I just realized if I don't capture these stories now, they're going to go. Yeah. And our elders really, that first generation that migrated here, their stories of growing up in India, growing up in Punjab, but then moving here and everything in between, I think is really important. Like I've grown up hearing those stories firsthand, but my kids haven't, not yet anyway, they're quite young. But then when they grow up, will they have the same story? So I just felt like it was really important to capture. So for instance,
no, it is. I mean, it's one thing that I wish I could do. I wish I could get to know my dad's dad better, because he died when I was about really young, about 7, 8. So my memories of him are quite limited. But he fought in the war, and he has all these stories of like being in Punjab and growing up there that I never got to hear. And I've only heard it secondhand through like my mama or my dad. And even then it's probably not from him. Like it may have a different
source, is it?
And it may have been glamorized a little bit. I don't know, but I just have to take their word for it. And it would have been great to just know him now when I'm at the age I am now, and then understand what his journey was and how he got here.
Yeah.
So that's really powerful.
And so that's an example of that project. And then I guess other projects it's the same. So there's always a reason, and usually I pick on issues to do with representation of gender, ethnicity, place, because they're generally the things which I think get either put to one side, or we don't have enough positive representation. So for instance, with the Commonwealth Games, the project I've done there is about really celebrating local people, and that was from the outset, but also celebrating local places where these
especially Sandwell, which is very diverse,
and smaller hubs which don't usually get noticed, any mention, but it's where normal people go week in, week out, participate in sports, for instance. So it's really celebrating those. And I guess with something like the Commonwealth Games, what will get talked about or seen a lot are these new stadia that have been built, these pristine buildings, but actually on a day-to-day basis, weekly basis, people like you and me, I'm guessing, go to these kind of slightly run down, slightly worn, loved, and they look a little bit grotty, but also they've got character to them, and they're the real places that people go and participate in sports. So that, for instance, is an overarching theme. Then for me, once I've got the idea, it's finding the right people, the right places I want to photograph, but then it has to fit into, well, if I want to raise and amplify voices for marginalized communities, I can't just photograph 20 white people. It has to also include, and if it's going to be representational of our community or of Birmingham and Sandwell, then we have to see faces and people from different ages, ethnicities, races, genders, all of that. Then I do consider that, and that kind of, as I'm working on a project, I'll have to keep coming back to, well, am I meeting what I want to achieve here? And if I'm not, then, well, what do I do about it? And go back to the drawing board, that kind of thing.
See, it's more than a photo, guys. I think you just see the photo. You don't see all this behind it.
All the
All
meanings
stress.
behind it, all the
The
deep
meaning of the
hidden,
strategy and the
all the deep strategy that goes into it is really important, man.
there's a lot of depth. I'm really happy that you do capture the story. I think that's one thing I've taken away from recently, and you two both allude to it now. Is so with my nanny, for example, there's something one of our friends Indy told me about. There's a company that I think on Dragon's Den, I think, who essentially will interview your family member and then produce a book about their life. And I
Wow.
was like,
Okay.
that's such an amazing concept. And I told my mom, and I was like, Mom, we should do this for nanny. This would be really, really cool. Because again, I listened to my nanny growing up a lot, and I know about all these like stories. I spent a lot of time in India as well. But again, going forward, like who's going to have access to that? Like that is the legacy. And then I told my mom, and then I was like, Mom, Mom was like, we should get for nanny. And then my mom was like, yeah, you should do it for me as well. And I was like, Mom, yeah, we will do it for you as well. But let's
do nanny first. Yeah.
And I just thought it's just amazing. I even think about something in the, I know you keep a journal, I keep a journal. Maybe nobody ever reads it, but even if our family members read it at some point, I find it really interesting that when I read something, it's got a date next to it. It's like, wow, this person thought this on this day. Like just to really get an insight, and then it's the same with photos, isn't it? When you see when we get together with family, you get, from India and things, you look through old photo albums and weddings and that kind of stuff, or in videos, you're like, wow, you always seem to forget, like, this whole thing about kids forget that their parents are young. They were once what we are now. And they had these thoughts and memories, and it's captured in these, these things that we see. And there's always a story. And actually, I've got this from you, Indy. So, the whole postcard thing that you do.
Yes.
So when we go on holiday, Jas, Indy has this thing where he'll buy a postcard.
It's not me. It was my wife's idea. Right.
I'm not credit where credit's due.
I'll give her credit for this. Right.
And then on the back, these guys, they show me how to do it. They just write down the jokes or the conversations or the memories on the back of the postcard. Because often you'll take pictures when you're on holiday, but sometimes you don't remember what was happening at the time. And then I've extended it now where actually I will take a few photos from that and attach it to the postcard. So now we've got the memory and the photo and what was actually in that memory, trying to just remember it. And I was reading the ones I took from last year, and it was really nice just to think back.
Yeah, it rings bells in your mind that you forget. You're like, oh, do you remember that? Do you remember this? And then some of them I've looked at them and I'm like, I don't remember that bit. Do you remember that bit? And she's like,
but I remember being happy.
Like, okay, cool. That's fine. I can accept that.
And I think photographs have that really strong
evocative.
Yeah, they're so evocative that you can look at a photograph and it takes you back somewhere, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I think old photographs especially are really strong in that sense. So with the work I've done with my family, I remember seeing a photograph of my mom's when she was at school with the whole school. So it's a school photograph with it outside though, and it's in Punjab, it's in the Bend, and you can see her old teacher. And it's just such a beautiful photograph. But as soon as my mom talks about it, my mom actually named the work, the Mitti Di Khushbu. It's something my mom always says whenever we go to India. That's what. That's what
the phrase. Her phrase.
Because and when you look at that photograph, you can just smell. You can see you can sense all of it. But definitely, they're so evocative, and I think that's something quite powerful about them.
Yeah.
With your work, do you ever capture yourself?
No.
No one ever captures the person behind the camera, Karen. It's a common thing.
Although for the project with my family, my husband took my photograph. It was awful. It wasn't good. I was like, when he was taking it,
he's like,
now is this you
holding
being
it straight?
self-conscious of how you feel?
Well,
or
no,
is it actually
it was
awful?
Bad.
Did you give him any training? This is the question.
Well, no, but I was sat there. He has seen.
We are men, okay? Men need to the point where if I'm
instruction.
Exactly. Yeah. If I'm in the kitchen, you want me to do something.
You tell me exactly how you want it done.
Right. No. I'm a bit like OTT. I'd be like, show me exactly how you want this chopped. Okay. What's the optimal technique for doing this chopping?
Technique.
See, the camera I use though, you've seen it. So I mean, the camera I use, because it was on a tripod. I couldn't physically take the photograph myself. He had to focus it himself. But when he was taking it, I was like, that doesn't look straight to me. And it's got a leveler on the tripod.
Wow.
And he was like, no, I think it's straight. I was like, I don't think it's straight. And So it
So
came
you had
out. It
some
wasn't.
Vinger 45-degree picture come out, and you're like, "This is
Oh, it
horrible."
wasn't too bad. I could.
And you're like,
I
this is
cropped it.
das Barn of the year, das Barn again, straight, man.
That
You can pay for that one.
cost me £1.
Yeah, but no. Other than that, I've never.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't have my photograph taken. I prefer to be on the other side.
It's about like a true
Which
photographer
part
or
do you
visual
prefer?
artist.
Which part do you prefer more? Is it the capturing the photo or the bit afterwards where you're getting into the story and writing? Was it about half?
Definitely taking the photographs. Yeah,
Mm.
I love that element because I love to talk to people. Love to get to know them, spending time with them, and something. Yes, I just love taking photographs. I think I find the editing really difficult actually because it's like, for instance, our conversation was, nearly an hour long, and then I had to edit that down to a couple of paragraphs. And how do you do? It's really hard. Like I wrote that out after. So every person I photographed for the lockdown stories, I had about a whole A4 page of writing on them, a whole story. But then when I had to come to the edit for the book, I had to condense that down even further. And I found that really difficult. I mean, there's something really satisfying in that though, in terms of creating something as an end piece. But
Product.
I find it quite, it's a bit like a puzzle that makes my head hurt a little bit sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's why I find the picture making a little bit easier. Well, it's more straightforward, whereas then kind of trying to make everything come together, you have to work out the different elements. But then I've got to say, then when you see the final piece, whether it's the photographs up in an exhibition or in a book that I've made, I love that. Then it's like, oh yeah, but it's all the hard work in between that I find. Yeah.
All the behind the scenes. And I guess for like me, for example, like you said, our conversation was quite long, and it's interesting the bit that you found most powerful. The bit you've quoted, like that for you was the most impactful bit, and it marries up with, say, the photo. Because a lot of people who've read that, they're like, oh, they'll actually ask me about what you've written. They're like, is that what it was like? Like, and just tell me, like, I think the bit I've written about is junior medical students becoming doctors, and we had consultants who just hadn't been doing this for a long time, and then I was in the middle, and it was just, there's no hierarchy. And the bit about morale being high, I think that surprises a lot of people. They were like, oh, wasn't it really tough? I was like, yeah, it was tough, but we were all in it together. And there was no greater time to be needed. I think that's what people liked. It was the call to be needed. And everybody played their part. That was the thing. Everybody was doing it. Like we had daily people bringing things to hospital, like, bottles of water and toothbrushes, and like Itihas was providing like catering for free. And there was so much happening. So yeah, amazing.